Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Stacy Oakes. I'm an organizer with 350 Seattle, and I'm part of the Tacoma LNG resistance team. And we just want to give a big thank you to 350 Seattle for putting on this series. Thank you to all of the amazing panelists that are joining us tonight. And also a big thank you to all of you joining us. And we know that people are joining us from, all over Western Washington. And one thing we'd like to do is just acknowledge that all of us joining from these different places around Western Washington, we're all on Coast Salish land. And we just need to make sure that as we move through our day, as we inhabit this space, that we're acknowledging these original caregivers of this land since time immemorial, and acknowledging that they continue that work today. One of the things that I think is really important is to couple acknowledgements with actions. They say when we know better, we do better. And so as we know this, we need to take that knowledge and take action with it. So I just open a challenge to everybody to try and take some sort of action based on some of the things you learn here today. This discussion that we're doing today on this webinar is the final part of a 4-part series called Racial Justice is Climate Justice. And some topics that were already covered last month were prison abolition, defund the Seattle Police Department, and affordable housing. Tonight on this webinar, what we're going to be focusing on is pollution, community health and wellness, and environmental justice, and how all of these things are inextricably linked to racism and racial justice. All of our panelists that we have on today are involved in pushing for both climate and racial justice on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup tribe, known today as Tacoma. These concerns that you might hear regarding that area and regarding that project are things that are mirrored in countless communities everywhere. As we go through today, basically we're going to be having a panel discussion, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A and give you some concrete ways to take action. So go ahead and we'll check in with our panelists, and just want to introduce all of the amazing folks we have with us today. We could go ahead and take off that, that slide, Shimona. Thank you. With us tonight, we have Megan Ibarra. Megan's an associate professor of geography at the University of Washington and a core organizer with La Resistencia. Her first book in English, Green Wars, Conservation and Decolonization in the Maya Forest, brings a hemispheric perspective to settler colonialism and indigenous land defense. Her research examines how abolition geographies can build towards indigenous sovereignty and environmental justice, including her latest publication, Site Fight, Toward the Abolition of Immigrant Detention on Tacoma's Tar Pits and Everywhere Else, an Antipode Radical Journal of Geography. Hi, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for being with us. We're also joined today by Les Pogue Jr., who's an environmentalist, a social justice and food sovereignty volunteer, a father, son, brother, and lover of Mother Earth, a Black man caught in the multi-generational struggle against the construct of whiteness and the mental illness of white supremacy in America. Les currently lives on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup people, known today as Tacoma, and is a native of Northern California with pioneer roots in Marysville, California, since the early 1800s, and proud descendant of American slavery. Les, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. I gotta hit the unmute button. And respect to the foundation and all Salish tribes. It's good to be here tonight.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if our third panelist has made it on yet tonight, but I'll go ahead and introduce them. Our counsel is Annette Bryan, and Annette Bryan is serving her second term as Puyallup Tribal Council member. Annette's previous work experience includes 10 years as tribal coordinator at the Environmental Protection Agency, and 10 years as the executive director of the Puyallup Nation Housing Authority, where she developed LEED Platinum sustainable, culturally relevant, affordable housing. She's dedicated her career to advocacy, the protection of our natural resources, Native American issues, and tribal sovereignty. Annette's a certified climate reality leader, has a BA degree from UW-Tacoma, and an MS degree in civil and environmental engineering from Tufts University. Ms. Bryan is honored and humbled by the faith the Puyallup membership has placed in her to serve in this capacity, to build on the foundation of those who come before her, and to protect the tribe's resources for future generations. Is Annette with us yet? All right. Well, hopefully Annette will be able to join us shortly. There's just a couple pictures of Tacoma that I'd love to have Shimona bring up for us as I kind of preface this first question around pollution. And these are photos taken at what's known today as the Port of Tacoma. And this place you're about to see used to be a thriving estuary. So we'll just get those pictures up. So Tacoma has been a city for 145 years. And in that time, this city has taken the lands and waters from a thriving estuary full of drinkable water, salmon, orca, gooey duck, clams, and many other shellfish, surrounded by cedar trees, deer, bears, and birds. Today, there are numerous Superfund toxic sites in Tacoma. It has a nickname for the town's stench called the Tacoma aroma. The salmon population is on the brink of collapse, and yet elected officials and staff of the city and port of Tacoma continue to invite, permit, and monetarily reward fossil fuel infrastructure and expansions and other polluting industries. So the question for the panel, we can go ahead and take down those photos so we can see the panel. The question I have is, how does this pollution affect each of your communities? And what struggles have you had in trying to clean up existing or stop new sources of pollution?
Is it the first one talking, or do we have an order?
Go, you know, I thought this would be a great one for Annette to speak to first, but let's go ahead and Les, if you're ready, I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I moved up to the Northwest in 2005, and I lived on Anderson Island for 6 years, built a house out there. And I moved to Tacoma, you know, around 2010, 2011, something like that. And like what was mentioned earlier, the Tacoma aroma, you know, I'd always heard about it and never really got the true history, but moving in different places in Tacoma and getting closer to the port, because I live in the hilltop, and that's 25th and Yakima, and it's overlooking the port. So as you see all that toxicity down there, the processing, the petroleum industries, and everything else that's down there, you start to realize what is down there. And then you get into the community and you see how that toxicity is affecting, you know, children. Black children in Tacoma have very high rates of asthma due to the exposure to this toxicity. And as you delve into that, you start seeing the history of Tacoma. You look into that after you live at a place for a while, you start, you know, familiarizing yourself with the area. And that history of toxicity is long lasting. And then you're establishing, you know, dealing with our climate right now and our social atmosphere, and making plans for if that fails. And when it's right in your face and you're exposed to it, you get to see the potential failure and how it affects the, you know, the neighborhoods. So for one instance, and I'll be quick with this, there was a lithium ion battery fire at the port 2 years ago. I woke up to go to work in the morning and stepped out on the balcony here at about 6:40 a.m. and this whole outside of my place was full of toxic air. As soon as I opened the door, I had to rush right back in the house because it was trapped in this area. And that fire had burned since 11 o'clock the prior night, and it burned for 20 hours. It was the first time that the port shut down to, you know, accommodate for its output plus the toxicity from the lithium ion battery fire. So that affects us folks living here at this 200-foot elevation, like tremendously. Everything in the marine layers here, all that gets trapped in here. So that's, you know, was there a second part of the question?
Yeah, if you wanted to talk at all about like your experiences trying to get these pollution sources stopped or to keep new sources from coming and adding to the, you know, to the burden.
Well, so being from California, that indigenous culture is very well hidden, and moving to the Northwest and having so much exposure to indigenous tribes, the Puyallup tribe is right there, you know, where all of this, you know, has succumbed the land there. And as I said, when you start delving into the history and the social, you know, the society part of these communities, you start finding out what's going on. So seeing that and having that, you know, connection with indigenous folks, I was drawn to it. And then you start hearing that, you know, all this port is down there, and they were going to build this methanol plant, and the methanol was going to toxify even more of the water, use millions and millions of gallons of water a day. Seeing that, fighting the LNG, and going to city council meetings, talking with school board, all these different, you know, entities that control these narratives around here. That effort seems to be not catered to. It's shunned, and there's a reason for that. So in the efforts of fighting all this, you know, and getting involved with, you know, indigenous folks and doing the block the gates and things like that, it has had me and other folks, Barb Church is on this call, we as 4 folks from the conversation put together a request for SEIS ourselves. Got no response from it, but as just folks concerned about the environment, we were able to do that and make these efforts. And you know, just recently the smoke fires. 2 years ago, we conducted community conversations around, are you concerned with the air that you're breathing? Because there was the lithium ion battery fire. You know, a few weeks after that, it was the smoke fires from California and British Columbia hitting us both at the same time. And the AQI was like at 290, possibly 320. And that was just smoke fire. And seeing the non-response of the city to protect its, you know, residents by offering buildings that they have, convention center, Tacoma Dome right there. And we asked if they would open their facilities up to help folks. People are houseless. They're in the streets having to breathe all this. Elderly folks, you know, with respiratory issues, you know, but to no avail. So now, just recently this year, they had the smoke fires a couple weeks ago or last week, and they did open up the East Side Community Center, which is in East Tacoma, for 50 people from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But it wasn't the city that did it, it was Metro Parks that did it. So it's like, They chose to do it. In the lithium-ion battery fire, the port chose to shut down industry, not the city. And we're requesting at these times like, hey, city of Tacoma, you are the ones that approve all this toxicity, 9-0 votes, you know, and on the interim regulations for 10% expansions for existing, you know, industries, but those industries are bought by foreign-owned companies. And it's just a sham, the whole thing. And to not even have the city just cater to, you know, the respiratory issues that exist in the air, as well as the respiratory issues that are existing in the residents of Tacoma. You know, as I started this off, Black children have very high rates of asthma in Pierce County. You know, that's just one thing, you know, so it kind of forces you to get involved. And that's the thing, like, it's just been so hard to get more people involved. And how do you do that, you know, with the lack of, I don't know, this culture just creates non-conversations. And, you know, that's a heavy burden. That's what I got.
Thanks, Les. Megan, did you want to add on to that? And then I want to thank Annette. I was able to hop on, and so hello, and I will be able to, I can repeat our question. And that was, I kind of listed off some of the pollution that's been to Tacoma, and, you know, where the salmon was at, as far as being close to being on the brink of failure, and how the city keeps continuing to permit and entice new fossil fuel projects. And the question is, how does this pollution affect each of your communities? And what struggles have you maybe had in trying to clean up existing messes or stop new sources of pollution?
Okay, so I will go first and leave Annette to close us out in the answer. So my name is Megan. I'm a Latina who lives in Seattle and does community organizing with undocumented folks and also folks based out of the Northwest Detention Center who are detained. Over 90% of the folks who are detained are from Mexico or Central America. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they speak Spanish, but they would be read as Latino. And here, I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that similar to what Lester was saying, Latinos in Washington state are disproportionately likely to suffer from what we're calling in this era of the global pandemic as pre-existing conditions, right? So they're disproportionately likely to suffer from asthma. They're disproportionately likely to suffer from diabetes. And during this global pandemic, it's particularly concerning because Latinos in Washington state are more likely to live in multi-generational housing, which means that they're more likely to be affected by COVID-19. So the infection rates for COVID-19 in Washington state are 4 times higher for Latinos than they are for whites. They are the highest in a state. It's wild. And, you know, there's just so much crisis going on right now that there's very little that we can really think about at any one moment, let alone, you know, hold space for the complexity that we're talking about when we're thinking about the ways in which on this call that's been put together, that, you know, Black folks, Latinx folks, and Indigenous folks are all disproportionately impacted by these broader structural conditions that sometimes are framed as sort of pre-existing or made to be individual, but are actually about, you know, how this pollution comes together. So in the 2018 Simon Meadow fire that Lester was talking about, that, as far as we know, was probably a series of cell phone batteries that spontaneously combusted. So this is separate from the wildfire, and this is about 30 meters from the Northwest Detention Center. So even as the entire port shut down, folks were advised not to leave their homes. People who were really negatively affected were closing their windows, we're doing all these things. The Northwest Detention Center was business as usual. All of the smoke was flowing directly into the detention center. And the calls that we got to our 800 number for Resistencia, it was in September 2018. I believe it was I believe it started on the night of September 17th. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. And it's really important to me because Simon Metals has been in operation and actually is one of a number of the groups that's included in that massive Superfund site that is so big that they've had to split it up into multiple operable units. Yeah, so it's right across the street from the Northwest Detention Center. Simon Metals was part of the Superfund remediation that cleaned up some places really well, and other places were cleaned up to this Port Maritime standard with the understanding that no one would live there. And right now we've got 1,575 beds across the street from Simon Metals. Yeah, it was in the news. So folks were calling us from inside the detention center saying, hey, is the detention center on fire? Because we can't breathe through the smoke. All kinds of folks were having asthma attacks without access to your inhaler because they only allow you really once a day for a non-emergency. And you have to get in line, and people don't have access to an inhaler on a regular basis. And so I went onto Tacoma Fire Department Twitter and found their pictures that were like, this is crazy, we're working on it, it's going to be hours and hours, don't leave your homes, close your windows. None of those were things that were offered to folks who were detained. And also, as far as I know, most of those news reports on Twitter and online were not available in Spanish. So the radio was doing it in Spanish, but as far as I know, other social media that many of us rely on to keep ourselves safe were only available in English. And as we know, English is not the only language spoken in Tacoma. So immigrant communities are disproportionately affected. And I guess in terms of the work that we've been doing, we actually have gone to the City of Tacoma Committee on Community Vitality and Safety and asked them to address these and other issues. Frankly, CVS has a lot of power to do binding actions, and they have largely chosen not to. So in 2017, Tacoma City Council did respond to our claims that the Northwest Detention Center should not be allowed to expand anymore, nor should any other residential facility in this area. And they officially changed their zoning policies to say, if you're hazardous, port maritime industrial or heavy metal industries, you can't have residential facilities, which includes juvenile detentions, jails, prisons, and detention centers. That was new. And so it doesn't, legally the city can declare the Northwest Detention Center a non-conforming land use and shut it down. They've chosen not to. For now, what it does do is provide a stopgap in which the Northwest Detention Center cannot expand any further legally. And so that's really important to me because we've gone from 500 beds to 1,575 in the span of a decade. So if nothing else, we put the brakes on. The city of Tacoma has recently been celebrating widely how excited they are that they passed a non-binding resolution saying that maybe detention is bad after all. And now I would like to see some action involved with that. Okay, I will stop there.
Thanks, Megan. And Annette, thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate your time here, and know that being a council member has got to be extremely busy. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Hux Lahale, Annette Bryan Teedsta. Good evening. My name is Annette Bryan from the Puyallup Tribal Council. And I want to sincerely apologize for being late. I was on a call with the PLU and the Sunrise Movement, and we were talking about these very issues. And I'll tell you, I want to thank all the faces I see on here. And Lester, you got it going on with your t-shirt, man. We're looking good tonight. I feel like we should all be eating dinner together as much as I see your faces. And I just appreciate from the bottom of my heart, everybody who's struggling along to get people to frickin' listen. And the youth, I'm inspired by the call that I just got off of. So that's why I'm late. In terms of pollution and how it's affecting our community, I'm not sure what conversations you've already had, but many of you know that the liquefied natural gas, fracked gas plant being built on the ancestral homelands of the Puyallup tribe is just one other addition to the multitude of industrial and toxic facilities that are sitting right on our homelands and right in the epicenter of where our estuary is. So one of the students did some research, and there was over 5,000 acres of estuary in Tacoma, where the Port of Tacoma now sits, and there's 3% of it left. I also heard last Friday at the youth rally, the climate strike rally, the racial justice rally, that we have just over 7 years before we stop irreversible climate damage. And so pollution is not new to the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. We have at one point had over 20 Superfund sites on our reservation. 20 Superfund sites. The Commencement Bay was a Superfund site. And we're now starting to see things grow on the bottom of the bay. The largest phosphate plume in North America is right underneath our marina over here by the LNG plant, underneath the ground, out of sight, out of mind, right? There's so much. And it's been that way. And, you know, I think about how exhausting it is. You talk about what the struggle is and what it's been. When I go to Washington, D.C., or Tacoma City Council, or the state of Washington legislature, you know, I've been in this fight for decades, and there were people in my people who have been in this fight way before me. And I think about how exhausting it is year after year after year to go and tell the same story, the same struggle, the same fight. And so to have people standing with us now and have us standing together, right? We're the others, but now we're all standing together. The Latinas, the Blacks, the Indigenous people, the Caucasian people, the friends, the allies, all the different groups that have come together. And we have to demand that this will no longer be tolerated, that you're not citing industries that are toxic in the poorest communities, which happen to be people of color in most cases, but people in poverty in general, because they come in all ethnicities. And that's what we have to demand. So we worked really hard through the tribe with EPA in friendly administrations to get the Superfund sites cleaned up. And, but we continue to fight. They continue to cite these facilities on our reservations. And you see that across the country, and you see that in indigenous lands across the world. That's where these facilities are cited. And I think someone was talking about we're the least able to fight. And so now people are paying attention. We are staying woke. We are aligning with one another. And we are implementing a multitude of strategies, right? So some of us are going to go and put on a suit and lobby to our elected leaders, government to government, you know, tribal officials. That's my role. I'm really good at that. Some of us are going to chain ourselves to equipment so they can't move anywhere. Some of us are going to be on social media and get the word out. Some of us are going to be getting our allies together. It's educating young people, speaking at the colleges. Like, we're all together, and with everything that we can do, we need to keep the pressure on. That's how we clean up this mess. So I think that was the question, the answer to that question. And I just, again, I'm sitting here with my heart full of gratitude that we're having this conversation, and we keep this conversation alive. And it's my goal and people's goal on here to see that that tank over there never gets filled.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm.
Yes, indeed.
Mm. And thanks for bringing up too that, you know, that we all come to this in different ways, and that it's all important. I think that is such an important piece of this in trying to show up, is that we don't have to show up like anybody else does. You know, we don't have to be good at everything. We just kind of have to show up and do what each of us are good at. So kind of changing just a little bit from pollution to more, you know, community health and wellness. using the Tacoma Puget Sound Energy's LNG fracked gas plant as an example. This massive operation, it was approved by the city without a community health assessment. It was approved without running safety modeling in the event of a catastrophic incident, like from an earthquake or just human error at the plant. And although the port is, like we talked about, full of toxic emissions from numerous industries, at no time when they're permitting new facilities is an analysis done of what the cumulative impact on the air quality is for the health of nearby residents. On top of this, even the Tacoma Human Rights Commission recommended that more analysis needed to be done for the Tacoma, for Puget Sound Energy's LNG plant, based on the disproportionate impact to historically marginalized communities, namely the Puyallup tribe, and the people detained inside the Northwest Detention Center that Megan mentioned. And just kind of mentioning all of that together, just want to hear thoughts from each of you. Like, what does that bring up? What does that make you feel? Maybe Megan, if you want to take this question first.
Sure, happy to do it. Yeah, okay, what does it make me feel? It makes me feel really angry. I think now is a really difficult time, right? Because there's just so much negative news that's hitting us. And so trying to figure out how do we focus our energies amidst all of these crises is so crucial. And for that reason, I really appreciated Annette's comments. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to organize in crisis without being a crisis-oriented person. And I've been thinking about this a lot, both in terms of just general burnout, but also learning a lot from disability justice and understanding that we can't all show up in the same way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that some people are more dedicated than others, but that people have different capacities based on the caregiving they do, based on their physical health and their mental health, and that supporting each other to show up in the ways that we can is really actually how we build community, rather than, you know, lifting up those few who do all the amazing things and then shaming everyone else for not, you know, putting their bodies on the line at every single moment. So I was really, really glad to hear Annette say that, yes, you show up in the ways that you can and you feel really good about the work you can do, even as we know that, you know, a lot of times the deck is stacked against us. One of the things that it made me think of is, so the precursor to ICE was the INS, which is Immigration and Naturalization Services. And when they decided to move the detention center from Seattle to another site, the INS held these like public meetings to decide where should the detention center be built. And it's crazy, according to their own documentation, they had these meetings in the library and didn't announce them to anyone in the year 2000. They literally said not one representative from government agencies or the general public attended. And that was how they did public comment. They didn't really advertise it very widely. They held it in a place and time that was inconvenient for folks who were working. And then when no one showed up, they took that as consent. And that's always what I think about, right? Like, what are the processes of consent, and what do we really mean when we think about community participation? So that's a clear thing that it brings up for me, which is sort of like, if the affected communities actually understood the decisions that were being made rather than the people in power, I think that the decision would have looked different. I also kind of wanted to say that, you know, just to remind that the tide flats, we all know that in the event of a tsunami, it will be catastrophic, regardless of who lives there, regardless of whether or not there is a liquefied natural gas plant there. And this is part of why we don't do the studies, because folks from the EPA and the Washington Department of Ecology have already very clearly stated that in the event of a large earthquake, there will be a tsunami, there will be, like, it isn't a liquefaction zone. We don't need more studies. We already know. We just need to make good political choices that value human and non-human life over industry.
Absolutely. Annette, do you want to kind of hop in next?
Sure. You know, I'm thinking we need to focus a lot on people first policies, and I know that packs a whole bunch in there that, but I'm hoping that people take the climate crisis seriously. And I like the idea of cumulative analysis, and I always ask for that. The laws are written in such a way that that's not a requirement. And I think if that's somewhere that we put our heads together and started pushing with lawmakers who do believe in climate change, that could be something that, you know, that's an avenue where we can start to make some progress to stop these facilities from being built on top of each other. And I think it's absolutely horrendous that the environmental impact statement that was done didn't have any environmental justice component. It didn't have any health effects component. And it really just dismissed the human beings and all living things that might be in the area. So when I had the map made up of the schools, I was just thinking, blast zone. I heard about this LNG plant because people were, this was before I got on tribal council, people were on the streets with their kids holding picket signs. And my son's like, hey, there's my friend so-and-so. So we pulled over, said, hey, what are you guys doing here? And that's how I found out about it. And so then I started marching with the signs too, and got in this fight about it, which, by the way, the PCHB did rule in favor of the tribe, compelling the courts to allow, the courts are forcing Puget Sound Energy to release the technical documents to us for review. And, you know, people who already don't have a lot, we're blessed in our tribe, we have a lot, sure, but we've spent over $1 million fighting these guys, probably 2 million now. And we'll continue to fight these guys. So how does it make me feel? I try not to be angry, because I think coming at it from a more intelligent standpoint and just trying to think, okay, we got to be smarter than what we're working with here, people, you know, and how do we put the knowledge that we have together and combine it with the emotions, the way we feel about it, and just telling our story to real people who can help us at those levels, the port, the city, the state. It's hard to do. It really is hard to do. And so tomorrow, the Climate Reality Project is putting on a climate grief workshop at 4 o'clock. And I'm going to try to tap into that, because it's also depressing. The more that I learn, the more that my heart hurts, because I am told that Native women feel the pain of Mother Earth. And I remember I was living in Boston getting my degree over there, and I came home and this 509 freeway was across the land, and seeing it for the first time, and I cried. And I have to drive across the tide flats to work and from work every day, and it hurts. It hurts in my spirit. And so emotionally, it's very hard. But if we can put people first in our policies, we are the change. Everybody here, we are the change. We're it. So I'm hopeful, because I know we can be smarter than what we're working with, and I expect people to do the right thing.
Thanks, Annette. Yeah, and I think that even, you know, without bringing up explicitly, you know, you mentioned kind of the mental health and the grief of that, and that is just being near pollution and being near not having your health taken seriously, like those other impacts of that on the mental health and spiritual health.
It's just another form of oppression, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes it harder to fight, makes it harder to show up and fight these things that drag on too. Yeah. Did you want to hop in, Les?
Yes. I appreciate what all y'all are saying very much. It's like, you know, like Annette, what you shared about crying, you know, when you saw the land done like that. It's just, my hope is that we can move this movement more geared toward common people. Because for so long, and I've been frustrated about this for the past several years, especially up here, is there's so much science behind it. There's so many naming the gases, naming the poisons, naming the millions of gallons, and this does that, and this does that. And I feel that there's that has, it needs to be there. We need to have the science, but we need to have the science in understandable, and I'm not trying to degrade anyone. I'm just saying that we need to have the science broken down to a more understandable, you know, technology or whatever, however we put it across, so that common folk can understand it, the folks that are suffering from it. These children, you know, that are having these high asthma rates and these cancer alleys, like these are we are the folks that are suffering from it, you know. And it's like, did you want to say something, Annette? Okay. The brother Dakota Case said the other day at the youth climate strike, he said, know your place in the movement. And that hit me like it's a reality, you know. So I take the knowledge that I get from going to all of these presentations and all of these, you know, pleas to the city council and governance and PSCAA and all of these, you know, acronyms, and, you know, and I'm trying to figure out how to break it down so it's more commutable, so I can communicate within my 20 block radius of where I live, you know, to these folks. And so that we can start showing up more at the table. There can be, instead of just being 40 people at a youth climate strike, there can be 700 people. There can be thousands, you know, because our numbers, we are in COVID, but it's the same thing without being in COVID. You know, the same people are showing up, and those are the people that have accepted that knowledge of what we're dealing with, that cry when they see the destruction. And these are lifelong commitments, you know, and it's like figuring out a way to get people, these, you know, our youth are telling us right now, they're pleading to us to, you know, make change, you know, real change. And we talk about the health effects. So you wake up with that lithium ion battery fire smoke. I grow vegetables right outside my door. And I got to start thinking about, in this movement for liberation from the fallacy of the construct of whiteness and the mental illness of white supremacy, I am planning on how I will live and my people will live for the next 20 years, you know, when it's $12 for a carrot. You know, the food that I grow is grown in this toxicity, and I'm eating that. And if we're expecting to move into this future, you know, living with this, those health effects are going to be coming to us. We have some choices. If we come in mass and say, hey, we don't want this anymore, this is not sustainable, you know, and for our future generations to focus on that. It's not about us. Like I'm 53 years old. My pops was talking about this when we were little tiny babies, you know, so it's like a lifelong thing. And it's like, I have a 19-year-old daughter. She's pissed about things, you know, and she has a sign on her truck that she just bought for herself that says, don't kill insects, you know, they are lives too, you know. They're real about it. They've heard this from us for at least my generation, you know. So we're back there right now. We are back to all the totally polluted rivers and the fish and you know, all of these animals are dying around us, and we need to do something. We have to get off of our asses, like, for real, because these folks are not playing. This is what they want. So we, in my mind, we have choices to make. We either continue to try to fight something that's never going to change, or we work on building our communities up and regaining our strength and our health. In our 20-block radius, we can affect more than we can trying to get with these bozos who won't budge, you know, and that's for our health, that for us to be more healthy people, you know, to not be depressed, you know, to be inspired to fight for, you know, reclaiming the land, you know, all of it. I appreciate y'all.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, it's one of the things I think about when I come down to Tacoma. I don't live down there. Is just thinking about like trying to grow food there, or trying to fish there, trying to swim there, and it's just heartbreaking. And to know that, you know, however many miles up the road, people do get to do those things, right, without as much toxins. And you know, I don't know about anybody else, but I can't imagine them deciding to site the Tacoma LNG refinery in Seattle, right next to the Ferris wheel and the cruise ships that come in, right? So so we have to know that, you know, these things that we've been talking about, you know, very, very short distances away, these same things aren't happening. And that's, again, that reminder of why, and that's racism, you know, and that's that devaluation of people. And so this the next kind of question I want to take us into is really about sacrifice zones and the connection with racism. And you know, in the wake of the world witnessing George Floyd's slow, just heart-wrenching murder by the Minneapolis Police Department, a lot of groups that really weren't paying attention to issues about race are now doing so. And we know that the environmental movement has traditionally been some of those groups. And the Sierra Club published an op-ed, I think in like June, by Hop Hopkins, and it's entitled "Racism is Killing the Planet." And there's a quote in there that really hits me really hard, and it makes me think of Tacoma so much. And it's, you can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. You can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. You can't have disposable people without racism. And so I just want to open that up for, you know, kind of thoughts based around those ideas.
Do I start again, or Annette?
Go ahead.
Moi?
Sure.
Go ahead, Lester.
Okay, sorry. So one of the things about this movement currently, that I'm trying to know my place in this movement, you know, is speaking about this construct of whiteness, you know, white supremacy, the capitalism. All those three things are the same, and they support each other, every one of them. And that mental illness that comes from that construct, it affects us all. You know, when we talk about white supremacists, or, you know, black people or red people or yellow people, you know, how this pseudoscience of, you know, color-coded race theory developed this, you know, where we are right now, up to this point. I mean, the president is on stage giving orders to freaking white nationalist racists. You know, we're here now. And that construct, that mental illness, that capitalism finances everything about fossil fuels. Fossil fuels finances all of that, you know, and that's our battle. How do we understand that construct? How do we understand, as, you know, I try to tell people, I'm a black man because of the construct of whiteness, plain and simple. My father is Ethiopian, French, and Cherokee Choctaw. My mother is Irish, Spanish, of British descent. That is a way deeper conversation for our humanity than just where the hell is black land? Where is white land? Where do y'all come from? Like, I don't want to defend that anymore. Like, how can y'all are killing us in the streets, just for, I can't change this. I can't change my mentality. I can't change the way I was raised. I can't change the ways from generations of trauma that's built up inside me, seeing all this happening right now, and knowing that there's a construct behind that can be deconstructed. It can be broken down. When we talk about mental illness and mental health, we look at how, if you research the Dr. Samuel A. Cartwright, back in 1860, whatever, this dude labeled a term called drapetomania as a mental illness that enslaved Africans, due to their trying to escape from being enslaved, had a mental illness, and he named it drapetomania. It was on the science journals until 1914. One of those treatments was, I can't get the Latin name for it, but it included flogging the skin, because his theory was that Africans didn't have any skin sensitivity and they wouldn't take orders. So you had to lash the skin, open it up, pour salt brine on it for them to get what they needed to understand that they're to work. That mental illness, that's the police state. That's that brutality that comes with the white supremacy. That's that murder and brutality that we see every day now. Breonna Taylor, they shot her in her sleep, killed her. And the cop only got convicted for jeopardizing a white dude's life that was in the apartment next door. Come on, y'all. This is ridiculous. And we talk about all of these things that are part of that white supremacy that get us to be in these zones, these sacrifice zones. We are sacrificial. But up here in the Northwest is a different case, though, because there's a lot of, if I can use the term white, if y'all would start identifying as Irish, British, Italian, whatever, don't be white no more. But we can get to solving some of these issues of, that sacrifice zone. Because up here in the Northwest, y'all are breathing the same shit we're breathing. Same thing. Northeast Tacoma, all up in them hills, y'all are breathing it too. So if we educate our folks, like in our radius where we live, to say, hey, this is what we're breathing. Take that science, give it to the people, but in understandable terms, relatable terms.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, absolutely. Annette, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yes, I'm in the kitchen with my little one, so I'll do my best. So, yeah, I think about this, sacrifice zones. I saw one of the things in policy making, again, back to making policies, how we allow these things or have allowed these things in the past, maybe due to our lack of knowledge. We're trying to dismantle a homeless encampment on the banks of the Puyallup River, not because we're heartless, but because they're defecating and leaving hypodermic needles, and their needs aren't being adequately met. And so there's danger to our fishermen have been fishing, and that's how we ran into the encampment. And they bring their children down there because we pass that culture down to our future generations. And it's in the city of Tacoma has these zones where you can't have encampments, like in the north end of Tacoma, right? So there's areas where these types of people can't be. Huh?
I need to be on a call.
Oh, and then so I'm babysitting, not babysitting, but I'm with the kids now. There's areas where certain people can't be, so it's like the opposite of the sacrifice zones. You can have nice things in nice places, and then the rest of us, we get the crappy stuff. So that's all part of policy that the more we understand and the more we learn about that and how those sentences are sort of snuck into laws and rules and regulations, we can then begin to unpack that. And I think about the 3 C's that are going on right now. We have climate change, COVID, and colonization. And I think Lester was getting to this, that we decolonize. And what does that mean? What has been happening with white supremacy? And I only say that because you can trace it back to where it started and where this we should probably define that too, because I don't ever want to offend anybody of any color. But there are groups out there that claim that they are the supreme beings. And that, so that's one problem. The other problem that we talked about too, and you mentioned this, Lester, was the money. So we have this big industry and corporations. And when I started my PhD program, one of the things I was starting to unpack was corporations and how they influence everything we do and everything around us. Corporations have more rights than people. And so unpacking that and finding a way to get at the hearts of human beings, our elected officials and politicians and lawmakers that are human beings that are making laws for real people. But money buys laws. And that's what we need to attack. And so another way to change things, because some people are disposable, but other people aren't. Corporations over people. I just, we have to change that. It's not okay. People are living, breathing things. And so I feel like I kind of, even the people in the encampment we had to move, there was about 30 people. Those are people. We have a heart for those people. They need somewhere to go. But when they're on a sacred site, then we had to draw a line and protect ourselves as a sovereign nation, because we've had so much taken away from us, and people took so much of our land away, and the city of Tacoma is not doing their part to address their citizens that are homeless, and now they're coming and staying on our little sacred piece of ceremonial grounds, defecating on it. So none of this is easy. None of this is easy. And racism is killing the planet. I wrote that down. That's it's sad, but it's true.
Megan, if you want to go ahead and jump in also.
Yeah, that's a lot. Okay. I think, so for me, when we talk about disposable people or disposable land, by which I think about land, water, non-human relations, I always want to swap that out, because so I am, as an abolitionist, I kind of work from this framework that no one is disposable and nothing is really disposable. So when we talk about, like, quote unquote sacrifice zones, and I'm gonna call this out and hate on it because it's an academic thing, right? Academics made up this idea of sacrifice zones. It became very popular. Nothing is totally sacrificed because it keeps on being here. Does the land survive in the way we think it should? No. Whose fault is that? Ours. Might the land outlive us? Currently, it seems so. So rather than talking about sacrifice zones and disposable people, I think about this a lot as like devalued people and devalued land, where if you think about this from a framework of racial capitalism, what we do is exactly what happened in the case of immigration, right? So when we talk about white supremacy, it's not this like random floating thing. It's highly spatialized. White supremacy, the spatialization of white supremacy means that when the land in central Seattle became valuable, that was when they decided to put the detention center somewhere else. And what they did was they said, well, this farmland in Auburn, now that's precious to us. But, you know, this land that we've already made disposable, we can further devalue that by putting a detention center on it. And what made the detention center possible was stealing the land from Puyallup while knowing that they didn't have the legal rights to in the first place. It is precisely that lack of legal right that they had that allowed for the detention center to be built there. And so for me, I'm like, this is about the spatialization of white supremacy. This is about the ways in which our particular legal system devalues peoples and it devalues land. And I saw earlier in the chat that someone was like, thank you for calling out yellow peoples. And one of the books that I've been reading and thinking about a lot is it's this book that came out with Harvard University Press. It's called The Chinese Must Go. It's from Tacoma, y'all. The title of that book, The Chinese Must Go, was from, it was from the Tacoma method, which was widely celebrated and brought other places. And so not only did they, so there was no precipitating act, there was no pretense of like violence against white or German communities, because at the time the Tacoma mayor was himself a foreigner, he was German. But that was okay because he was German. So this is the production of whiteness that we see. You can be a foreigner but simultaneously white because you're the right kind of white. And so they told everyone who built the railroad that they then decided to use to, carry all these toxics back and forth, that they would have to go. And by everyone, I mean Chinese workers who built the railroad. They announced it more than a month in advance. They put an ad out in the newspaper. The Chinese community went to, they didn't go to the mayor because the mayor was the one who was promoting it, but they went to the county, they went to the state. And as part of this process, at the city level, they actually had a party to celebrate the eviction of the Chinese, in which this woman made a cake with like the little candy buttons, and the candy buttons spelled out, "The Chinese must go," as part of the eviction. So that's what we're known for, nationally. And I think that just speaks to how deep this runs. It's not that those people are actually left. It's not that all of them actually died. It's not that they were actually disposable. It's that they were devalued in a system of racial capitalism in which this performance of whiteness could no longer extract things from them that they wanted. And I just really want to emphasize that, the Bracero program is a whole other thing. The Bracero, okay. So my grandfather worked on the railroad. He was a traquero. Which means that he didn't come in the Bracero program. He came, so there were more people who came in the Bracero program, by which I mean Mexicans who came during the time of the Bracero program. There were more people who came without legal permission to the US than there were who came with legal permissions from the US. And the folks who put together the Bracero program knew that, and they did it as a goal of devaluing labor by racializing Mexicans as not doing things the right way. That dates all the way back to the Bracero program. And if you don't speak Spanish, what Bracero program means is like, we want your brazos, right? We want your labor, but we don't care about your hearts and we don't care about your mind. That's exactly what the Bracero program means. But the other side of that is that the Bracero program, even when it was saying we'll create a right way, had both this notion of like the right way, and at the same time, they knowingly recruited labor from people who could not get through the Bracero program, like my grandfather. So that, I mean, when I look at the railroad, I mean, this is like, I came to the detention center for my students whose parents were detained there. And I stayed because I thought about my father, who lived in a railroad boxcar hauling toxics through high school. And he's already dead, you know, and I can never prove it because this is how public health works. This is the difficulty with understand, like the science of cumulative impacts, as other folks have noticed in the chat, is behind what we know in our lived experiences. So in my lived experience, I'm like, I think my dad hauling that toxic waste as a small child with his bare hands was maybe part of what killed him off. But I can't say that. There's no cluster program. Like there's no way for me to ever say for sure. But the railroad is what kept me there. So what I want to say, no people are disposable. No land is disposable. So when I hear folks from the Puyallup talking, what I think about is reparations, not in terms of the cold hard cash that capitalism teaches us to think about, but in terms of relations of repair, which means understanding that that land is Puyallup land. It always has been, it always will be. It needs to go back to them and they need to decide what happens to it. And that it's not disposable. It might take more, I mean, given all of the harms that have happened, I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. And I'm okay with that because I understand that my lifetime as a woman of color is short. But what I do understand is that my responsibility as a woman of color is to move towards relations of repair that restore us in right relation with each other as humans and in right relation with the land, which means moving towards cleaning up rather than causing further harm.
Yes, I.
Well, I want to leave a little time for the audience to kind of get some questions in. So maybe we'll stop with the questions that I have prepared for us and take a few from audience folks. Let's see, I don't think we have like a hand raise function here, but let's go ahead and we can take any questions that folks have, and if possible, if we'd love to take any questions from traditionally marginalized voices first. Or if nobody has any questions, then I can see, was that out? Is that your emergency phone list?
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. And you can also just write questions in the chat. And maybe while folks are thinking of their questions, let's hop over to our take action slides, and I'll just go through those while folks are thinking up their questions too, and we can hop back and answer those in a second. If Shimona has our take action slide ready. Thank you, Shimona. Loading. And I think everybody heard, I think everybody on here talk about how we, need to match action and education. And so some of the things you can do is you can continue to educate yourself on systemic racism, white supremacy, indigenous sovereignty, and the intersections where those cross with climate, health, and pollution. And then as far as actual specific local battles, we have that Tacoma LNG fracked gas refinery, and it's not too late to stop that facility. And there's a lot of ways to show up for that I'll have on another slide after this. And also, again, because we can't just show up for one of these fights, we need to show up for local calls to actions on police accountability and funding. And Tacoma has at least 4 people who have not received justice that were killed by police. And in the follow-up email, we'll have a link to all of the demands from the families of those 4 people. You can also make sure that you're showing up for immigrant rights. One of the things right now we're seeing with COVID and with smoke is farm workers having a really hard time among the ways that they were treated even without those things. Just like Megan was saying, we want your arms, but we don't care about you. So showing up for farm worker demands and also showing up for calls to action to shut down for-profit prisons like the Northwest Detention Center. And again, we'll have some good concrete links for those for you guys in the follow-up email. And on the next slide, on a few things for the Tacoma LNG resistance, there is several toolkits that'll be in that email. We're encouraging people to write to elected officials and local newspapers about the project, and definitely upraising the sovereignty issues as well as the health and safety issues. We also have a toolkit that's going to help you be able to post and have some graphics and different things, post on social media. One of the things that we can do while we wait for the legal appeal to come is make sure that the public knows about the project, knows about Puget Sound Energy's bad actions, and just kind of help educate everyone. Another way to do that is by showing there's a documentary about the Tacoma LNG resistance, really angled at the lens of looking at this from the stance of different Puyallup people. And that documentary is called Ancestral Waters. It's beautiful. It was made by Native Daily Network from on the ground, being on the ground for several years, showing up for the fight. We have a toolkit available to help do screenings. And then you can also sign up to get calls to action on a listserv for this fight by sending an email to our subscription list. So let's go ahead and we can take down the slides, and let's see if we have any good questions in the chat. I apologize, but it's hard for me to see the chat. So if either Shimona or it looked like Megan was having an easy time seeing the chat there, had a good question that came through. We'll take that.
Yeah, we have one from Hillary about how does PSC, Puget Sound Energy, factor in, whoops, people keep typing, the question disappears, where'd it go? How does PSC factor into all this? As a PSC ratepayer, I want to do more.
Did any of the panelists want to take that? Otherwise, I can answer that question. I will go for it. Puget Sound Energy is the company that is building this fracked gas refinery. So it was their choice to be doing this. They know full well and have for several years that the Puyallup tribe says they do not want this facility. They know that there hasn't been health and safety studies done. The city of Tacoma worked with Puget Sound Energy to try and bring this plant to Tacoma. Even going so far as, I believe, starting to plan some of it as far back as 2009, waiting for the right opportunities to take advantage of putting more dirty industry there. And Puget Sound Energy as a ratepayer, as somebody who gets Puget Sound Energy in your house for your gas or your electric, you're actually going to help pay for this project. So you're being forced to actually help fund this project. At the moment, only about 2% of that project would be used for residential customer use, and the rest would just be selling the gas for a profit, a little bit for trucking, but mostly as a maritime fuel. And so you're paying for a project that you don't get to use. That 2% use, you're going to have to pay, I believe, about 43% of the project. So just another way that PSE has manipulated going through these policies in order to get the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission
I might have to go.
force us to pay for this. Go ahead, Les.
Hey, pardon me. I got to cut out. Peace, love, and liberation. Do work. Be better. Love y'all.
Hi, Lester.
Thanks, Les. And I see boycott candidates who take money from PSE. You know, one of the things is that PSE is really good about having a lot of money to spend, our money that we pay them as customers, to spend on making themselves look good and to make fracked gas look good. And so one of the things you can do when you're using that writing guide or just giving a call to your elected officials is making sure that they know that Puget Sound Energy actually qualifies as a fossil fuel company, and that they are on the list if you if they're going to sign the pledge to be a no fossil fuel money contributions, they are not allowed to take money from PSE. So definitely helping educate your elected officials that it's gross to take PSE money. PSE also sponsors tons of events for things that it seems weird that they would even sponsor. So if you notice PSE is a sponsor for an event that you're part of or that you're going to, letting those folks know that maybe they don't want PSE as a sponsor and why. PSE has a lot of other just kind of bad business practice behaviors too. Does PSE fund police departments? Not directly, but to some degree, I think they do in that, you know, if you watch that documentary, Ancestral Waters, you'll see numerous parts where police come out to meet the people praying or standing outside of pipeline work or outside of the facility. And they get paid by Puget Sound Energy to go do those things. You can rent police for your events, including fossil fuel companies. And I would assume including down in front of the detention center when there's rallies that they're getting money for those things too. I see Megan shaking yes, yeah. So in a roundabout way, yes. And then also those people we've been talking about on the Tacoma City Council, the same people who take money from PSE and then make these decisions about PSE take money from Geo Group, which is the for-profit prison group that run the Northwest Detention Center. Those same people also take money from the police union, I think from like taser companies, and just, you're gonna find that the people who are okay taking money that comes from causing harm will take it for pretty much any reason.
Yeah.
Do you want to add on to it, Megan?
Yeah, if okay, because it looks like I might be the only one of the panelists left in these last few minutes. I think what's really interesting to me in ways that things come together. So they're basically, when you think about stuff like the Northwest Detention Center, or you know, a lot of these kinds of who is going to engage in oppression of activists, right? There's two options. One option is, like, so when we're talking about the Northwest Detention Center, I participated in a shutdown action and the police showed up and whatnot. The Northwest Detention Center and Geo Group didn't actually pay the police back. So the city of Tacoma and anyone who lived in Tacoma subsidized that. And what we have learned is that in the event that the city of, or the Northwest Detention Center calls 911 and needs medical services for a medical emergency, Geo Group has to reimburse the city. But in the event that it's anything else, the city of Tacoma does not charge Geo Group for it, and anyone who lives in the city of Tacoma is in fact subsidizing. Yeah, welcome. So they have these MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, and there's no money attached for the city. And the original reason was because the city thought that it was going to be good paying jobs for the city. Those jobs, as usually has happened, have not materialized, and to the extent that the jobs that are not great have materialized, a lot of the folks who get those jobs don't live in Tacoma. This is common with jails, prisons, and detention centers. The other thing that I have learned in, so I'm a college professor, and I have been working and engaging with my students and thinking about how do we get cops off our campuses, right? And there it's really interesting. Tacoma has a security force, but they're not armed police. They're like security guards. And so they collaborate with Tacoma Police Department. At UW Seattle, we have our own certified police department, and our cops have both tasers and guns. In addition to that, at various events, so like if you go to a climate justice event at Kane Hall at UW Seattle, or if you're going to go see Milo at UW Seattle, or if you're going to go to a football game at the Husky Stadium, UW contracts with police officers who are either retired or who are off duty and getting extra money. And those folks sometimes are from King County and Seattle.
That's really cool. And I feel kind of bad because I have not emailed or talked to Kim. But
Oh, I think we have.
Kristen, I think you might, yeah, I think maybe Kristen did not mean to interject. Anyway.
It's great. Can you be too excited about something? And yeah.
So point of the story being, even if you are off duty or retired and from Tacoma, you are engaging in policing in all kinds of places with all kinds of money. And I know from working at the University of Washington that all of the incoming police officers, regardless of whether or not they have disciplinary records before overtime, make more money than I did in my first year as a professor with a PhD and 4 years experience. So just to give you a sense, police, they get a lot of money, they don't have a lot of accountability, and it's something we should be thinking about, whether we're thinking about tribal sovereignty, detention centers, or just, you know, your daily life.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah. Soon we're coming up against that end of our event, and just want to thank everybody again for getting on and for everybody's comments and just being really engaged throughout this whole discussion. And if there are other questions that didn't get answered, you know, you can definitely reach out. And also, again, we're going to have a follow-up email coming out over the next few days, going to have links to reading and videos and stuff to kind of ground yourself in even more material around stuff we talked about, as well as links for taking action in Tacoma and elsewhere. So just want to thank everybody again so much, and thank our amazing panel and everybody that helped get this particular event and this whole series on. It's so important for us to dig into these connections between racial justice and climate justice, and what we think we can do to fix this giant problem, this giant place that we find ourselves in. Their closing words, Megan, that you wanted to share?
Show up however you can, in whatever way you can. We appreciate you. I'm grateful. I know Annette and Les and everyone else is as well. Thank you so much for being here with us.